Perhaps this is the beginning of a new golden age where modern monetary theory proves to be effective and the rules of economics are rewritten. But let's be honest, anyone who is making a bet that it will succeed has poor risk management comparable to the degenerates at Wallstreet Bets. Unlike Wallstreet Bets who gamble with their own money, these central planners are gambling with the prosperity, liberty, and lives of their citizens on a chance that it would be better, but who knows by how much. Many countries have seemingly recovered from the economic collapse that happened during COVID. The number of business bankruptcies is beginning to ramp up, and the stock market is in a major correction. The reality is that we are currently undergoing the biggest and most concerning economic experiment in history. This experiment has the potential to lead to a new golden age of economy or to a new dark age that the world has never seen before. In ancient China, copper coins were widely used as currency among merchants. These coins were heavy and inconvenient to carry around, so merchants deposited them with a person or business and received a promissory note or banknote in return. This allowed merchants to avoid carrying heavy coins and ensured safe storage at a single location, creating the primitive form of paper money and fiat currency. The Chinese government implemented a new system of currency, where merchants deposited heavy copper coins with a person or business and received promissory notes or banknotes in return. After a few centuries of using this system, the government noticed a copper shortage, causing them to issue more promissory notes and less copper coins. During this time, the government saw a significant boost to its economy, allowing them to spend more on military and infrastructure. In an effort to further control the currency, the Chinese government declared that their new form of fiat or paper currency was a public monopoly owned solely by the government. This allowed the ancient Chinese government to completely control its own currency for a couple of centuries, and their ability to print money on command and control inflation worked well. However, a global threat emerged from Central Asia, when a man named Temujin united the Mongol tribes in the year 1206 and became known as Genghis Khan. He launched the largest military conquest in human history, and his successors eventually took over China, ending the Yuan dynasty in 1270. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. During the Yuan dynasty, the newly formed Chinese-Mongol government wanted to fund their conquests by manufacturing more paper money instead of limiting their spending or worrying about government debt. They believed that because they were the government and had a public monopoly on its currency, they could do whatever they wanted with little or no repercussions. They turned their paper money into the world's first fiat currency and ran their empire on a new economic theory. This approach worked for a while, but after years of war and ignoring debt and inflation, the economy of the Yuan dynasty began to collapse. Inflation rose to 80% in the early 1300s. There was a severe debt crisis. The population became impoverished within 5 years, and the government's theory on how printing money could solve their economic problems failed. This economic downfall and the government's inability to help its people after several natural disasters led to the collapse of the Yuan dynasty in 1370. Today, governments from around the world have compiled record levels of debt in order to keep their economies afloat. During the pandemic, governments have printed money at record levels, comparable to what the Yuan dynasty did in the early 1300s. This is due to a major event that caused governments to spend more money than they should and ignore debt. This strategy has worked similar for the Yuan dynasty. Inflation has only begun since the government has added more than 80% of the money supply since COVID. Modern monetary theorists say there wouldn't be inflation, but they were wrong in the 70s and they're wrong now. Simplifying it, some economists argue that as long as a country owns its currency as a public monopoly, it can operate and print as much money as necessary to avoid an economic collapse. In a sense, the government is no longer constrained by tax revenue or deficits. As long as it can print the right amount of money, it can avoid big economic hiccups. However, it should be noted that modern monetary theory is a complicated topic and the explanation provided is a simplification of it. Regardless, we are living through arguably the most dangerous economic experiment in history right now, and it is uncertain what the outcome will be. There are only two outcomes to the current economic experiment, one of which is that the money supply becomes tightly controlled while the world's governments and economies adapt to this new monetary theory, as seen in countries such as Japan and Italy, who have high debt but have not experienced a true economic collapse. The other outcome is that the monetary experiment fails, leading to a global economic collapse where currencies become worthless. The question arises as to why inflation has not risen more significantly despite the creation of 80% of the world's money supply within the last 2 years. Inflation typically peaks during full employment and when businesses are operating at full capacity, which is not currently the case as many places are still having difficulties from the lockdowns. Another reason is that economic collapses usually take years to occur, and it is often a gradual process before the dramatic and sharp drop-off. Many notable economists and investors believe that the current economic trajectory is similar to Germany in the 1920s. For example, Michael Burry, who has correctly predicted and profited from the last 3 economic collapses. The tech bubble in the 1990s, the financial crisis in 2008, and the current pandemic has been warning of an inflation crisis since February of 2022. He argues that inflation crises are typically preceded by an economic or stock market boom, a spike in overnight fortunes, followed by civil unrest, an increase in crime, high cost of living, poverty, and other economic problems. This can be compared to what happened in Germany after World War I, where the government printed more money to help pay for government debts. Initially, the German mark was relatively healthy, and many citizens had a little extra cash to invest in the stock market. However, a year later, the German mark experienced a high level of inflation, which caused economic problems, but the currency itself did not collapse and remained relatively steady for another 2 years. As debts piled up and more deficits were ignored, more currency was printed, ultimately leading to economic collapse. The system in Germany broke down in 1922 and eventually led to severe hyperinflation and a complete economic collapse in 1923. It took 5 years for Germany to experience an economic collapse after it began overprinting its currency. It's not certain that the same predicament will happen this time, but it would be unwise to think that it's not a possibility. There is a possibility that our generation may have lived through a golden age since the 1950s, where the average person in the world had access to adequate electricity, hygiene, medical care, and other things. This year may be looked back upon as the year that our golden age of economics ended. Similar to what happened to the Roman Empire, Yuan dynasty in Germany, or we could enter a period like Japan, where the economy doesn't collapse, but it chugs along with a new theory of economics. Alternatively, perhaps this is the beginning of a new golden age where modern monetary theory proves to be effective and the rules of economics are rewritten. However, it is important to remember that those who do not study history are doomed to repeat it. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content like this.